Frances told me a few years later that she was sort of thrilled at the way that Diana sort of freed herself, as she saw it, from the shackles of royalty and from being a member of the royal family and striking out on her own.
Nobody in the British establishment saw it coming. One DNA test in 2013 unraveled a secret that Britain's most powerful families had guarded for over 200 years. It proved that the future King of England carries the blood of a woman, his own ancestors erased from history, separated from her children, and replaced with a lie so convincing that even her own descendants believed it for generations. Her name was Eliza Kowark, and this is her story. The secret Britain kept for over 200 years. On June 14, 2013, a Scottish genetic testing company called Britain's DNA called a press conference and told the world something it was not prepared to hear. Dr. Jim Wilson, a geneticist at the University of Edinburgh, announced that Prince William carried Indian ancestry. Scientifically confirmed, traced through 7 unbroken generations of mothers and daughters, locked inside a type of genetic material that cannot lie and cannot be faked. To understand why this finding was so bulletproof, you need to understand what mitochondrial DNA actually is. Most of the genetic material in your body is a blend from both parents, mixed and reshuffled with every new generation until tracing it back. More than a few decades becomes almost impossible. Mitochondrial DNA is completely different. It comes only from your mother, who received it only from her mother, who received it only from hers. It does not blend with paternal DNA. It does not dilute. It travels whole and unchanged from mother to child across centuries, which makes it the most powerful tool in genetics for tracing a direct female line. Dr. Wilson's team did not test William directly. They took saliva samples from 2 living relatives sitting in his direct maternal line, an unbroken chain of mothers and daughters stretching back from Diana's own mother, Frances Shand Kidd, through 7 generations. Inside that DNA, they found a genetic marker called haplogroup R30B. At the time of the study, this specific marker had been identified in only 14 people worldwide. 13 were from India. 1 was from Nepal. Not a single European, not one Armenian, not one person outside South Asia had ever been recorded carrying it. The statistical case here is not complicated. The probability of someone of claimed Armenian heritage carrying a South Asian haplogroup that has never appeared anywhere in the European gene pool by pure coincidence is so small that Dr. Wilson described the evidence as unassailable. When the findings were published, headlines exploded across the world. The story was everywhere, and at the center of it was a name that almost nobody outside this one family had ever heard: Eliza Kowark. That name had been buried so deeply for so long that even people who carried her DNA had no idea she was Indian. To understand how that happened, you have to go back to the city where it all began. The woman history erased. Surat, on the coast of Gujarat in western India, was one of the most commercially intense cities on earth in the late 18th century. The British East India Company used it as a primary operational base. Ships from Persia, Oreti, Arabia, Chile, Portugal, and Britain crowded its docks. Merchants from a dozen nations competed along its waterfront. The city was loud and profitable and cosmopolitan in the way that only port cities built on trade can be. Today, Surat cuts and polishes roughly 90% of the world's diamonds. In Eliza's time, it was cotton, indigo, and opium that made fortunes change hands. Eliza was born into this world around 1970. Her surname, Kowark, resembles the Armenian name Kvork, and letters addressed to her were written in Armenian script, which strongly suggests her father belonged to Surat's established Armenian merchant community. The Armenians had been trading in India for centuries, building churches, running businesses, and occupying a respected middle ground in colonial commercial society. They were neither the ruling British nor the colonized Indian population. Eliza's mother, however, was Indian, and it is through that maternal line that the rare DNA descended. DNA does not care about the stories families construct. It simply records what is true. Theodore Forbes arrived in Surat from Scotland in 1788. He was a third son, which in the inheritance customs of that era effectively meant he had no financial future waiting for him at home. The estate went to the eldest. The second son might receive a settlement. The third was expected to make his own way, and the East India Company offered one of the only viable paths to genuine wealth for a young British man willing to sail to the other side of the world. Theodore hired Eliza as his housekeeper. That word carried a specific and deliberately vague meaning in colonial India. Researcher Alistair Moffat, who investigated Eliza's background as part of the Britain's DNA study, found that the label was routinely applied to relationships far more intimate than domestic employment, relationships that produced children but were almost never acknowledged as anything more than convenient arrangements. Theodore and Eliza had 2 children together. A daughter named Catherine was born in 1812, and a son named Alexander followed in 1814. Theodore never married Eliza. In his own records, he referred to her as the purported mother of their daughter, Catherine. The word purported means supposed or alleged. He was inserting deliberate doubt about the mother of the child she had carried and raised. That was not careless phrasing. It was preparation for what he was already planning to do next. Theodore Forbes decided to return to Britain. He took 9-year-old Catherine with him. He left Eliza in Surat with nothing, not even the legal recognition that she had ever been anything other than a servant. And the family waiting on the other side of the ocean was already building the lie that would hold for 200 years. The brutal separation and the lie that followed. Catherine was approximately 9 years old when she was placed on a ship to Scotland and told she was leaving India forever. She would never see her mother again. There was no legal avenue Eliza could use. There was no document that acknowledged her relationship with Theodore in terms any British court would recognize. She had no social standing that gave her any claim over the decisions of a British East India Company employee. She was left behind as cleanly as if she had never existed. What happened to Eliza after that moment is one of the most haunting silences in this entire story. She does not appear in any archive researchers have been able to locate. No death certificate, no church record, no civil registry entry, no grave marker in Surat. Dr. Jim Wilson noted that very little is known about her, including when she died. A woman who had lived in one of the busiest trading cities on Earth, who had borne 2 children with a British merchant, simply vanished from the documentary record the moment her daughter was taken. The most honest explanation for that disappearance is that it was deliberate. Catherine arrived in Scotland and was remade. She was educated, taught the customs of British society, and told never to speak of her mother or her origins. The Indian half of her heritage was not merely kept quiet, it was replaced. The family could not erase Eliza entirely because too many people already knew that Catherine had a mother. So they changed who that mother was. In Victorian Britain, where the aristocracy organized itself entirely around ideas of racial purity, Indian heritage in a family climbing towards social respectability was considered disqualifying. The substitute identity they chose was Armenian. Armenian was exotic enough to be interesting, but European enough to pass without raising questions. It was Christian. It had ancient commercial traditions. Nobody looked twice at it. Documents were adjusted. The family story was refined and repeated until it had the feel of established fact. Within 2 generations, nobody in the family was consciously telling a lie anymore. They were simply repeating what they had been raised to believe. This is how historical erasure works at the family level. It does not need forgeries or burned archives. It needs only a false story told to children who have no reason to doubt it, and those children told to their own children with the same unquestioning confidence. By the time Diana Spencer married Prince Charles in 1981, the official Spencer genealogical records still listed Eliza Kowark as Armenian. Diana's own maternal aunt, Mary Roach, told journalists after the 2013 announcement that she had spent her entire life believing she was part Armenian. She had absolutely no reason to think otherwise. The falsified bloodline had become invisible, even to the people carrying it. And it was moving, one generation at a time, toward Westminster Abbey, where the Queen of England herself would one day watch it walk down the aisle. The hidden line. The mitochondrial DNA Eliza passed to Catherine in Surat in 1812 did not weaken as the generations passed. This is the biological fact that made the entire cover-up pointless from the start. While the family's Armenian story traveled through the decades as a social identity, Eliza's actual genetic signature traveled alongside it in the cells of every daughter in that maternal line, completely unchanged, completely intact, completely indifferent to whatever the family had decided to say about itself. The line moved through Catherine's daughter, Jane Scott, then through Jane's daughter, Ruth Gill. Ruth married Maurice Roach, the fourth Baron Fermoy, a member of the Irish aristocracy. The title matters less than the personal detail. Baron Fermoy was a close personal friend of King George VI. The Roche family was not adjacent to the British royal circle. It was inside it. In 4 generations, Eliza's DNA had traveled from a housekeeper's quarters in colonial Surat to the social intimacy of the British throne, and nobody along the way had the slightest idea. Ruth and Maurice's daughter, Frances, married John Spencer, Viscount Althorp, at Westminster Abbey on June 1, 1954. Frances was 18 years old, the youngest woman to marry at Westminster Abbey in over 50 years. Queen Elizabeth II was there. Prince Philip was there. The Queen Mother and Princesses Margaret and Anne attended. Journalists praised the young bride's composure. Society pages gave the wedding sweeping coverage. Not one person in that building knew the woman walking down the aisle carried a mitochondrial DNA sequence that had never been recorded in any European person, and that traced directly back to a woman in Gujarat who had been deliberately written out of her own family. Frances and John Spencer eventually had a daughter named Diana. Frances Spencer, born July 1, 1961. She grew up on the Sandringham estate, played as a child with young princes Andrew and Edward, and became Lady Diana Spencer when her father inherited his earldom in 1975. By every outward measure, she was exactly what she appeared to be, a product of English and Irish aristocratic lineage entirely at home in the world the British upper class had built for itself. And somewhere in every single cell of her body, haplogroup R30B was waiting, unchanged, since Eliza Kowark had passed it to Catherine in a port city in Gujarat 150 years before Diana was born. On July 29, 1981, roughly 750 million people watched Diana Spencer become Princess of Wales. The secret she unknowingly carried into that marriage had already survived 200 years. It was about to travel one generation further before a laboratory finally ran out of patience, the science that cannot lie. When the findings were published in June 2013, the first family response came from someone who had no idea what the DNA was going to say. Mary Roach, Princess Diana's maternal aunt, had volunteered a saliva sample for the research without any expectation of a dramatic outcome. She had grown up absolutely certain she was part Armenian because her family had told her so with complete confidence her entire life. When the results came back showing the Armenian story was a fiction built 2 centuries earlier, her reaction was not embarrassment or denial. She told the Times she had always assumed she was part Armenian and was now delighted to discover she also had an Indian background. The cover-up had deceived its own descendants so completely that the truth came as a gift rather than a scandal. Journalists asked the British High Commission to comment on the situation. Journalists asked the British High Commission in New Delhi whether William might visit India to acknowledge his confirmed Indian ancestry. They were told no such visit was planned. When William did travel to India in 2016, it was for routine royal duties, and the ancestry question went unacknowledged in any official capacity before, during, or after the trip. 11 years have now passed since the announcement, and the institution has maintained total public silence throughout. The silence is harder to understand when you place it alongside the political context. India has over 1.4 billion people and is one of the fastest-growing major economies on Earth. It holds a central position in the Commonwealth. Strengthening the Britain-India relationship has been a stated priority of the British government for years. The confirmation that the future King of England carries Indian ancestry is a genuine, scientifically verified human connection between the British Crown and the people of the subcontinent. It required no manufacturing, no diplomatic negotiation, no compromise. It was simply true. And the institution that could have used it chose to act as though it had never been announced. There is something in that silence that rhymes with the original erasure. Eliza was hidden in the 19th century because her society had decided Indian women did not belong in respectable British family histories. The logic was colonial. The people Britain ruled were inferior, and their blood contaminated the bloodlines of their rulers. 200 years later, the institution whose future head carries Eliza's DNA looked at a moment that could have broken cleanly from that logic and said nothing. The world changed, the family changed, the silence remained. But the DNA was not finished. Inside the next generation of royals, it was still traveling forward. Whether it continues into the future of the British monarchy comes down to one child out of 3, for a reason built into the same biology that exposed the secret in the first place: royal silence and a family's long-held belief. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis all carry Eliza Kowark's mitochondrial DNA right now. Every cell in their bodies contains haplogroup R30b, the same marker found in 13 people from India and 1 from Nepal and nowhere else on Earth. Eliza's genetic presence did not stop with William. It moved 1 more generation forward when his children were born, but only one of those 3 children can carry it further. Mitochondrial DNA travels through the maternal line only. A mother passes it to all her children, sons and daughters alike. But a son does not pass it to his own children. His children's mitochondrial DNA comes from their mother, not from him. This means George and Louis will carry Eliza's haplogroup in their cells for their entire lives, and it stops there. Princess Charlotte is the only exception. If Charlotte has daughters, she passes haplogroup R30b to every one of them, exactly as it traveled from Eliza to Catherine in Surat over 200 years ago. Charlotte is the single living link between Eliza Kowark's genetic line and the future. The shape of this story, when you step back and look at it whole, is extraordinary. A cover-up built by a family in the 1820s survived the Victorian era, survived the expansion and collapse of the British Empire, survived 2 world wars, survived a royal wedding watched by 750 million people, and survived 150 years of aristocratic social climbing. What it could not survive was a laboratory that looked at the data without any interest in what the data was supposed to say. Eliza's complete story will never be recovered. What she did after Catherine was taken to Scotland. Whether she ever learned anything about her daughter's life in Britain, when she died, who was with her, whether anyone recorded her passing, all of it is gone. The historical record is silent because the people who controlled it had reasons to keep it silent, and they were thorough. What cannot be taken away is the fact that she existed, that she was real, that she lived and loved and raised children, and that she was separated from those children by forces that gave her no voice and no recourse. The DNA gave her back. It cannot undo the separation or restore her name to the documents it was removed from, but it proved she was there. It proved she mattered. And it proved that her body carried something no amount of deliberate erasure could reach. 2 centuries after her own family tried to replace her with someone more convenient, a scientist looked at a strand of mitochondrial DNA and found her waiting. The future King of England carries her inside him. So do his children. That is not sentiment. It is a biological fact, and no silence, however long, changes it. Eliza Kowark spent 200 years as the branch that was cut from the family tree. The extraordinary irony is that her blood now flows through the veins of the family whose empire decided she was never worth remembering in the first place. History is never as settled as official records want you to believe. Behind every polished family tree, there are people who were quietly removed, and sometimes, 200 years later, a strand of DNA refuses to let them stay forgotten. Drop your thoughts in the comments below and tell us whether the royal family should have spoken publicly about this or stayed silent.